Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Economics. This is the second lesson in the series. Today's discussion is titled Development. So what would viewers learn or gain from these discussions? We're going to understand what is development or economic development, what it was before and what it is now. What is GNI and how has it evolved, the historical perspective with respect to GDP, GNI of developing countries. Then what is the new view of development with respect to poverty, inequalities, and unemployment? What is Amartya Sen's view or definition of development? That is very important. Now, what are his 5 disparities between real income and actual disadvantages? We're going to be looking at the core values of development from sustainability, self-esteem, and then freedom. Then we're going to be looking at the objectives. We're going to tie it in with objectives of development. We'll end up with the central role of women in development, but then it takes us straight into Millennium Development Goals and SDGs and Sustainable Development Goals. But that will be the next after this discussions. That's the MDGs, an assessment of the MDGs, and then SDGs. All right, the name is H. Kwame Afaglo. Today is the 21st of November 2023. So let's just zoom straight into action. In the 50s and the 60s, newly independent countries have struggled to attain their economic targets, their economic wealth targets. However, it loses its trickle-down effect. They never have, up until now, we have never found the code of trickle-down effect, meaning that we have big GDPs, we've achieved our GDPs, but we have not actually eliminated poverty with our people. Our people in developing countries are going through enough poverty, widened poverty, abject poverty. There's disillusion, and then there's misery within our people. A significant number of our people are jobless, and that is one thing that we have to look at. Making the meaning of development has to change. Development is just growth or an advancement, a progression, but we have to relook at it. Before, it was looked around, economic growth was looked around GDP and GNI. GDP actually is gross domestic product, and gross domestic product is the total output of goods and services within a jurisdiction or within a territory in monetary terms. That's the monetary quantification of the output, total output of goods and services of that country. If that be the case, it will mean that if the GDP per capita, that's dividing the total monetary value over the total number of people and then determining how much each person gets, is important. But is that sufficient enough to achieve what we want? That is to eliminate poverty? No. So then new views of development has come, that is looking at it from eliminating poverty, reducing unemployment to the barest minimum, that is about 5 percentage points, meaning that employment must be fully geared about 95%, and then minimizing inequalities or bridging inequalities rather. Okay, so you look at GDP of some countries and then you ask, what is happening? Is there freedom, or is there... You're looking at Saudi Arabia, like $21,000 per capita, $21,000 per person in a country, but are they having the necessary freedoms? I'm not too sure. But we'll look at some of them as we go along the line. Look at Nigeria. The GDP is about $2,500. But how many poor people are in Nigeria? It's staggering. You have USA with $64,000 per capita. That's each person. The wealth of the country per person is $64,000. But look above, underbelly of the US. You can see from the picture, some others are sleeping under bridges, homeless. So many homes, but a lot of people are homeless. Is this what we call development? No, it's underdevelopment, I would think. Okay, so then with this introduction, or with this stage, now we know that there's a new view. In the 70s, there came a new view. In the 1970s, a new view of development came up. That is what? To look at development from the perspective of eliminating poverty, then bridging the gap of inequality and reducing unemployment to the barest minimum. That is the new definition or focus of development by economists. One notable economist, the thinker, development economist, who is a development thinker, is Amartya Sen. He is a Nobel Prize winner, and so he looks at this concept that, look, what are incomes? If we measure GDP in incomes and wealth, what is wealth and income if it doesn't satisfy a need or doesn't satisfy a want? So it is not an end in itself. See, GDP and GNI are not an end in itself, but they are tools. So for him, it's about functionalities of these incomes and wealth. It's about capabilities. What does he mean by functionality? Is when he says functionality, what wealth can do. And then capabilities is got to do with what? What control do you have over that wealth or the income? And so we look at it in this sense. He says, look, you can have high income, but you could be sad. You could have low income, but you could be happy. And so these issues of GDP and GNI has to be looked at carefully. When we talk of GNI, I've mentioned GNI twice or thrice. Let me explain it. GNI is gross national income. It's a measure of the state's income and divided by everybody's per capita. So gross national income is simply what? The total output, domestic and foreign, in monetary terms, claimed by the residents of the country. So it means that GDP is part of GNI. GNI has got domestic and foreign output that is claimed by residents of that country. But GDP is just the goods and services produced in that country by residents and non-residents. So those are the differences. GNI is a bit bigger than GDP because it has a foreign component and other factors that we look at. So in that sense, we realize that history has got it that in the 80s and the 90s, there was disillusionment in most developing countries with coup d'etats having taken place. Ghana had a coup d'etat in 79, Nigeria had its own, and several of these coup d'etats happened in developing countries because they were disillusioned. Poverty was stinking and was spreading and was becoming too biting. The misery was so much, so the people revolted one way or the other. I'm not trying to justify coup d'etats, but I'm just explaining what has happened and we learn from them. In the process of learning, we have found out that, look, is it possible that we could really define this thing of wealth? Yes. Let's take a break and back. Yes, we are back. We talked about GNI, and the GNI of gross national income of developing countries in the 80s and the 90s ran into negative because they had incurred a lot of foreign debts. A lot of foreign debts from banks in the Western world, from groups, donor agencies, from Bretton Woods institutions, including WBG, that's World Bank Group, and so much that they had negative growth and they had to cut down on their social amenities, social developmental plans, and then they had to cut on their economic goals, economic plans for the people. It means that the misery had then increased, and so then this GDP and GNI is not sufficient enough a measure for people in developing world. We have not found a code, and I say we've not found a code of trickle-down effect, because if you have GNI high or GDP very high, you should expect a trickle-down effect to the individuals, but it is not. If it is not, then we have to change our ways. We have still been doing the same thing and we still are not changing. Nigeria is not changing, Ghana is not changing, several countries have to change. Now we have to look at how do we reduce poverty, how do we eliminate poverty rather, how do we bridge the inequality gap. Then we have to look at how do we minimize unemployment to the barest. That is it. That is what we should be focusing on. So the thought of GDP and GNI is good, but it's not sufficient as a measure. Okay, so then Amartya Sen is looking at this fact, as I said, that income and wealth based on what? Functionalities and capabilities. That if you have that income and wealth, is it doing what you intend to get to solve your problems? And that is it. Does it give you that freedom? Okay, so he says there are 5 disparities in incomes and its disadvantages. Actual real incomes and actual disadvantages. Let's look. One is personal heterogeneities. You have enough money and you used to treat your illness. That is a plus. It's an advantage. You don't have enough money and your illness is so high and you can't treat it, it's a disadvantage. You have enough money but you don't have the human beings to help you treat the illness, it's a disadvantage. So if you are disabled, if you are a person with disability, there is the likelihood that you now spend a lot of your income on getting support services, If not, the state would have to provide that for you. If the state doesn't provide, then you are at a disadvantage. That's underdevelopment for a nation. And that is not worth what anyone would want. The other bit, that's the second part, is environmental diversity. When it comes to environmental diversity, it's looking at both temperate and tropical. And that's Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen is looking at tropical and then temperate. In temperate regions, we have cold weathers, and if you have money or you have income to get heating, then it's an advantage to you. But if you don't have enough money to buy heating or to pay for heating services, or the state does not provide your heating services for you, then you are at a disadvantage. That is the underbelly of the US. That is a problem. In the tropics, there are so much diseases. If you have money to treat yourself, to prevent it is the best way, then you're okay. You're at an advantage. But if you allow, or you don't have money and disease hits you, like malaria, diphtheria and others hits you, then you're at a disadvantage. If the state doesn't come to treat you, you're still at a disadvantage. These are issues that we have to look at. He says, look at pollution. Then we're looking at the third bit is social climate. Amartya Sen's social climate is looking at the two parts of it. What is incomes and wealth going to do? If our incomes and wealth is to go to war and kill people, displace people from their homes, give them misery and all that, so then we are spending, but we are at a disadvantage, because once we are spending at war, then we're putting people in misery. It's a disadvantage. So the case of Israel bombing Palestine as of today, 2023, going down and bombing them, Palestine also sending rockets into Israel, it's just creating so much misery for people. Over 13,000 people are either dead and or injured. A lot of people are displaced in Palestine. They have to sleep in hospitals. Hospitals are bombed. Doctors are dying. Nurses are being killed, and all that stuff. And so that is a disadvantage. So war itself is a disadvantage when it comes to social climate. But the advantage is, if you are in peacetime and you have your family around, you could go for family meetings, you could go for family parties, Christmas time, you share presents within the family. That's social capital. If you have a problem, you pick a phone and call a family member, it's sorted out. Social capital. You benefit from social capital. It's not always the money aspect of it. For an instance, someone wants a course taught on Zoom or online, and so they call Kwame, please, can you help us teach this topic? And I said, oh, yes, why not? You just send me the money, I stay in my home and I teach, or I stay in my office and I teach. That is social capital, because we are on the same network. We may be on WhatsApp, we may be on Facebook, we may be on LinkedIn. So that's LinkedIn. And so that's how it works. That's social capital. Not necessarily blood relationships. Blood relations are fine if they can get you that social capital. It's good, it's capital. Okay, so the fourth one is distribution of wealth within the family. If the income of the family comes in, how is it distributed? Is it evenly or unevenly? If it's evenly, there's an advantage. But if it's uneven, then it's a disadvantage. You want to send children to school, you have 5 children, you want to send them to school, and you send 3 to school because they are boys, and there are 2 girls, you leave them at home. Or boy and girl, you have only 2, and you send the boy to school and then you leave the girl because the girl, you want her to get married. That's a disadvantage. It's uneven, and it's not proper for development. It's an underdevelopment because you are weakening yourself. Okay, the other bit again is that, look, are we gaining that enough from health? When it comes to health, are we distributing the income and dividing ourselves in inequalities? Women self, you go to traditional practitioners or for plant medicine, and then the men's or the boys' health you take to orthodox or to the hospital. Is that what you're doing? That is also not the very best. The fifth one is what? Differential relational perspective. When it comes to that, we have a wide difference between the low-income countries and the high-income countries. The low-income countries, you could have, say, a couple hand washing their clothes together and chatting. They are building that relationship. You could have a high-income country where they have washing machines, phones, TVs, and all that. And when it comes to washing, one person goes in, a note is put down, wash my clothes, then they just put it in the machine, and then that person washes, that partner washes, and then he has no one to chat with. He's not building enough relationship, but that's what it is. So it's a disadvantage sometimes. Even though you are high income, it can be a disadvantage, and you can be low income and it could be an advantage. That advantage is about utility. Both is about utility. How do you utilize for happiness? That is your welfare. Your welfare is what incomes and wealth, GDP and GNI, should end up in our welfare. And so if it doesn't end up in our welfare and our freedoms, then it is not worth it. It's an underdevelopment tool. So then we have to be quite cautious about that. So level of happiness matters. And when it comes to happiness, we're looking at, now there are measures in happiness. See, Amartya Sen's work has traveled so wide that UN has accepted it, other entities have also accepted it and are using it effectively. And I mean effectively. Other bodies are measuring like level of happiness, the degree of wealth, quality of life. They are from Amartya Sen's work. And so we need to be a lot more serious with how we look at GNI and then Amartya Sen's view of what? Development, which is leading now. Let's take a commercial break and back. We're talking of level of happiness. Some countries have high levels of happiness and they have incomes. For an instance, Iceland, it has high income and it's a high degree of level of happiness. For an instance, they have a high income of $75,000 per capita, GDP per capita, and they have a high level of quality of life, and the happiness, level of happiness in Iceland is as high as 200%. Then you come to Nigeria, as low as $2,500, and the level of happiness is as low as 4.4%. That tells us that we need a certain basic to satisfy a certain basic. When we satisfy those basics, physiological basics, then thereafter it brings about happiness. If you don't sort out those basics needs of life, it doesn't take that, it doesn't make you happy. You could be cheerful though, but it doesn't really make you happy as a person or as a country. So we have Richard Layard's views of happiness. He says, look, there are 7 views for him. He says, 1, family relations. If you have a good family relations, it improves your level of happiness. If you have financial situation, if your financial situation is good, then you are happy. If your financial situation is poor, then it's problematic. You know what it means. A broke person when you're working and incomes are coming regularly is better than erratic, unpredictable income, you know. Then community and friends. If you are in your community, you have friends and you can socialize, it's better. It gives you that wealth. See, social capital. If you have good health, if you are not in good health, it's problematic. If you are in good health, it's wealth. Using the wealth properly, then it means that your level of happiness will go higher. If your personal freedom, if you don't have freedom, your level of happiness is low. But if you have enough freedom, that is choices, alternatives, several to choose from, that you can use your income to buy your preferred option, then it's fine. If your personal values are not respected, that's the last one. Your personal values are not respected, then it's problematic. And that is what Richard Layard proposed. Let's look at development again. Let's go back. It's all in the process of development. Let's look at the core values of development and then how it works in its perspective. We are getting closer to the end, but we'll do it pretty nicely and shortly. Sustenance. When it comes to core values, there are 3 core values here. 1 is sustenance, 2 is self-esteem, and 3 is freedoms. When it comes to sustenance, what are we generally saying? Our understanding of sustenance, the fundamental human needs, and these 3 are just universal, cast across every society. Everybody wants sustenance, must have food, must have shelter, must have protection, must have clothing. That is what we are saying. Every human being needs food, shelter, health, and protection. That is basic. It's a need, it's not a want. So when you go to US and then you have people sleeping under bridges, as I've shown earlier on the screen, it's underbelly of US. It's not good. When you have other countries where there's enough housing, but people are sleeping on the street, this is not good. It's underdevelopment. When you have countries where people have been displaced, they have no home because of war, either internal or external aggressions have attacked them, it's not good enough. It's not development. So you look at Ukraine. It's just so bad that people don't have anywhere to stay. We know what's happening in 2023. I mean, it's global news. It's not development, it's underdevelopment. When you miss one of them, it takes you to underdevelopment. When you go to some countries, everybody has a home. Everybody has been allocated to a shelter. Everybody has an insurance to get to hospital and be treated, and treated with dignity. See, when there's dignity, is what we call self-esteem. That respect that we give to others, and they return that respect to us, is what we call self-esteem. Our self-worth. You have to, it's reciprocal. Self-esteem and respect. Respect in particular is reciprocal. You give respect to others and then it's returned to you. If you don't give respect to others, they don't return it to you because of reciprocity. All right. So then that be the case with our self-worth. It gives us that freedom. Then that worth, that's development. That's development. Low-income countries, some could have high self-worth. High-income countries could have high self-worth. But at the same time, high-income countries, some could have low worth, self-worth. And low-income countries, individuals could have high self-worth. And so you look at it in that aspect of development. The other bit is that self-worth, we are being made to understand that if you want a high self-worth, you have to westernize yourself. That is, modernize yourself. Modernization is just about adapting Western technologies and Western values. But I'm not too sure what that means. I'm not too sure. You don't need Western values to be modernized. You don't need Western technology to be modernized. For as long as you are solving all your problems, your incomes, or you have other ways of solving your problems, and you are living freely, you have choice with self-dignity, you are developed. And that is the controversy that you would have to be thinking about. Okay, so then freedom is the last bit. Freedom is the choice one has among a lot of options. If you can choose, that's the functionality, and then the capabilities, the control over your income, what you choose, then that is freedom. Emancipation from servitude. Don't allow yourself to be used by others to serve their end. Once that is done, then you are free. We have political freedom, we have rule of law, we have freedom of expression, we have equal opportunities, and political participation. They are all freedoms that we have to respect and honor people for. Okay, in that same view, it's interesting to note that some countries like China, Singapore, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, they have high GDP and high GNI, but that freedom is eluding them. That freedom is eluding them big time. And so that must bring about that liberty, that liberation, that choice of all that we all need. And in that same vein, we are looking at how do we as a world, in our developing countries, how do we increase the availability of basic needs? See, we need sustenance for sustenance, basic needs for sustenance, food, health, shelter, protection for everybody. Even USA needs that shelter for everybody, but they are still eluding them. But they make it look as if US is close to heaven. It's not. For heaven's sake, it's not the best of development. Some countries have no homeless people, and people are all right. People have choices. They have high per capita income. What about Iceland and co, Finland and co? Look at those countries and you see what it is. Shelter for all, health for all, food for all. We have abundance of food, but some people are still struggling for food. Go to South Sudan and they need food to eat. Some people need food to eat because they've been displaced. You go to Palestine, they have been displaced. You go to Ukraine, they have been displaced. We have to get them food. People must eat. People must be housed. People must be given health. Those are issues that, and they must be protected. And those are issues that we talk about when it comes to sustenance. Then living, we have to raise the living standards of our people. Living standards of our people must be raised. We must give them employment, work must be available, high incomes and all that. Let's give them better education, better health. Those are maternal well-being is important. The other bit is we have to expand economic and social choices. That's under freedom. When we expand social freedoms like that, it makes it better for the world. That is development. If you kept freedom, it's under development. If you cannot sustain your people as a country, it's under development. We get into the last bit, so I'll wrap up here and say, look, let's look at the central role of women in development. We have men and women in the world. I mean, there are new variants of gender definition, but let's just look at it in the generic form. Men and women. Generally, we classify women as what? There are more women in poverty than there are men. Why? Because most women are domestic unpaid workers. Meanwhile, they have value to what they are doing because of their reproductive system. They have to take care of the children. They have to take care of children when they are sick. They have to give birth. Their body itself gives birth. And so we have to invest in women such that whilst they are nurturing the next generation, they nurture them with what? quality. They spend most of their income on their children. Women spend most of their income on their children. So we have to invest in women such that they invest in their children, that the children that come after us are of higher quality and of better standard, living better, and that is development. It takes us, all these ideas takes us to what Amartya Sen has done, and that leads to you and us having to accept Amartya Sen's view in its Millennium Development Goal 2015 and change into Sustainable Development Goals, MDGs to SDG 2030. The next presentation will be on MDGs, an assessment of MDGs and SDGs. So this brings an end to this lesson 2. Thank you. The name is H. Kwame Afaglo. You can contact me and make your comments as I've provided above. Thank you.